defer to you.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. I think we are moving into a second part of Longevity Medicine Day that is just as exciting as the first part, which is the panel discussion. And we will have some questions prepared, but feel free to be interactive and also to ask questions. We will have a part where we will welcome questions from the audience. I will not present all the speakers anymore because we have all seen them in the first part. However, we have one speaker that unfortunately could not join us in person from China. It's Dr. Weiwu He, a great and amazing scientist who was one of the part of the lab of Craig Venture, cracked the human genome, and ever since has been a tremendously successful person in science and also in the industry that is supporting the science, and is now the chief director of human longevity, and is joining us directly from Beijing, right?
Hello.
Hi, Weiwu. Great to see you.
Hi, everybody.
Right. And so welcome very much. And Sebastian, please feel free to kick off.
So this is the first panel discussion, the general topic of what is needed to translate geroscience into the clinic. So maybe the general question to start would be, how do we indeed translate geroscience discovery into the clinic? Is there a prioritization of certain things that we should do first? What would be the hurdles? So who wants to start to speak about this? Felipe, do you want to say something?
I could, but I think the most appropriate person would be Jim. I mean, he actually talked about the importance of involving geriatricians or physicians and things like that. So, Jim, I think, sorry to put you on the spot, but it's not the first time either.
Yeah, I guess there are multiple ways of doing it, and probably there should be multiple things going on in parallel rather than in series. So I'd say taking multiple approaches around the world, all progressing at once will be the way to do it, and then using new mathematical techniques, it's possible to put things together that appear disparate on their surface. And I think different interventional strategies could be used. As Nir and I have talked about, we're using the word and, not or, when it comes to looking at these various ways of doing things.
So I could add some. I mean, I agree with that. Is this
Yes.
Okay.
Very old-fashioned.
So what you're saying, I mean, to me, is critical to have multiple clinical trials in parallel. Yeah, I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But I think that it's also a matter of affecting policymakers and getting the concept out. And the reason I ask you to answer is because you always say something you didn't say this time, which is to get the word out to the physicians, which are the ones that are going to implement what we're trying to do. We can do anything we want in the lab, but unless we get the physicians to buy in, it's not going to happen. So I think that that's a very critical part.
Let me just, this is working? Yeah, see? I think we can get lots of trials going, all the rest of it. It's not working? We can get trials, all of that I agree with. But one thing the field needs is some agreed endpoints. Yeah. Because if every trial done around the world has their own endpoint, you just won't be able to compare. You may not get the critical mass. And so at some point, the field has to come together and say, what are the biomarkers? And remember, I always say the Wright brothers built a plane that got off the ground, not a 747. So if we wait for perfection, we'll never get there. But if we can be practical and say, what is the consensus? And this work you're helping lead, Jim, right? What is the consensus of what are acceptable biomarkers which can be incorporated into the endpoint and get going on those rather than launch the trials and every year come up with the latest biomarker and the latest clock. And what will keep happening is by the time the trial's done, you've got this new clock and you'll go to decision makers saying, by the way, that's an old clock, it doesn't really, I've got a better one. It doesn't work that way. So we have to bring the field together and do some of the initiatives like you're doing.
I think in addition to, at the same time as trials are going on, is to measure similar things across trials and, hopefully things that are validated and where maybe even things are measured in the same place. It's very important to have biobanking and archive data so that reverse translation can be done later. And as new things are found, there are biobanks available of blood, of other body fluids, of data that can be tested for new things as they come along. And to do that properly is very tricky. It's one of the things we're doing in the Translational Geroscience Network. The NIH has been very kind. They're allowing us to use their data, their biospecimen repository, because we're talking about like literally millions of samples over time, 45,000 per year just now at the beginning, and that's going to become amplified. And it's going to be important to have those things retrievable, tied to medical records, and the right consent processes built in at the beginning. We put in 2 layers to our consenting. One of them is, in addition to consenting for the trial, do people consent for their samples to be used for other trials and by other investigators? But a second level, and in the US this has to be asked separately, are you willing for studies to be done from which you might be personally identified? So there's a separate level of consent needed if you're going to be doing sequencing, for example. And it's not trivial to, from multiple sites, store samples in exactly the same way, using the same SOPs, and have them stored centrally, and to be able to get the right consents. And then the other thing that's very important is the analytics side. How do you store the data from the trials? How can this be done in a way that's acceptable? In the US, it has to be acceptable to the various IRBs and to the other regulatory agencies. So we've had to move from things like re-aims and things like that, which are not compliant with HIPAA in the US, to more compliant systems. And this evolves all the time. The regulators change all the time what they consider to be a system for data storage that's acceptable and with the right firewalls. So I think all these things are moving targets that have to be built in and thought about prospectively.
Andrea, you want
to... Yeah, may I add? Another level, I think we should really work on the quality of our trials. If you compare it, so cardiologists, endocrinologists, they have big trial networks, they have trialists in there. I think we need to train trialists in longevity in our field. What we are seeing very often is very small trials, which can be very explorative, very nice, but they will never show you an effect size, how much an NMN or an AKG or whatever will bring to the table. And there was also the return of investment of a client, because that's what people want to know. If I take it, for how long, how much gain will I have? That's the question, because this is how we make decisions as humans. So I think we need to improve, I think, the quality. You do great studies, so it's a more general a remark of seeing published articles. I think another very important point we didn't touch on yet is using all biobanks on the earth, having also clinical data, using observational cohort studies. There are already consortia looking and validating biomarkers and measuring from biosamples which have been achieved like 20 years ago, already markers. I think we need a little bit more investment in that. And next to that, which is a lower quality level, but having an observational database of individuals who already either changed their lifestyle or taking supplements, taking repurposed drugs would also be, while learning in the field and having the randomized control trials, would be, I think, very useful to see and watch if markers are, for example, sensitive to change, which people want to see, and I want to see as a physician.
Right, thank you so much. Wei Wu, would you like to also give your perspective on how do we bring gerosciences to longevity medicine? What are the barriers? Where are we standing from what you are experiencing?
Yeah, I will probably just describe a little bit what we are trying to do actually. Human longevity has been started since 2013. It's almost actually next year, it's our 10th year. We have now operated 3 clinics, one in San Diego, one in San Francisco, and one in Beijing. The whole idea of human longevity was created by Dr. Craig Venter and Peter Diamandis, that if we had all the data, genomic data, whole body MRI, metabolic data, we will know so much about an individual. So we can actually bring in the measures to delay age-related chronic diseases like cancer and cardiovascular diseases. So, the more we actually are diving into it, we realize that it's really a very, very complex, challenge we are facing. But I think, we actually published a PNS paper about 2 years ago, which is describing our data from the first 1,200 patients. And the finding of that paper is just taking a general client into our clinic using genomics, whole body MRI, or the other precision measurement. About 2% of people already we can discover an early cancer risk. And about 6% of people you can discover like a risk factor like arrhythmia, and it's so we actually I actually am personally more convinced now that anybody going through a very comprehensive genomic whole body MRI, other measurement workup, your lifelong risk of dying from cancer can already be reduced by 80-90%. And this really comes down to a individualized medicine. So people are coming in, we find they have mutations like P53 mutations or CHEK2 mutations, which their colon cancer needs to be checked up much earlier than the average standard, medical guidelines, colonoscopy at 45. Some people really should do colonoscopy at probably before the age of 40 because they have genetic predisposition. So we are really a very individualized machine when it comes to age-related chronic diseases. We have, 20-year-old who has a calcium score of 400. And we have 60-year-old has 0 calcium score. So it is actually, when you put all that data, we believe there is going to be a data set for almost every individual. But the question is, how do we democratize such precision data set to the billions of people? So we always use the analogy that traditionally it takes 20, 30 years to train a really good physician. Just like in Chinese, we have a game called Go, the game Go. It takes 20 years to train a master player, a Go player. But, when after Google invented the AlphaGo, an average Go player can actually match almost a master level Go player. So we believe that actually a lot of these data eventually will be driven by AI and machine learning, that every individual, every one of us will get a data set measurement on annual basis. And your guidelines to avoid cancer and cardiovascular diseases, for example, will be very personalized. And that protocol in the future should be extremely inexpensive because it's all data driven. And that's kind of what we are trying to do in the very small part of this longevity journey. Obviously, we're focusing on how to delay age-related chronic diseases as part of the aging effort. And as we also call ourselves, as we're doing the Framingham study, So our client are members with this kind of perspective study. So our ultimate endpoint is if we take this journey for 50 years, hopefully the OS of our membership is 20 years longer than average population. Okay, so that's the ultimate clinical trial.
Thank you so much. That is actually bringing us to the next question on scalability. Maybe we can shift this and to ask, how do we actually scale longevity medicine? How do we democratize, as you mentioned? What does it take on the public health level, on the funding level, in your opinion?
Yeah, so this has been broached on a few times today, right? I mean, we just heard about this very deep phenotyping. I mean, to me, the question that comes to mind is the cost, right? And associated with that is the scalability. And I think there is an incentive to democratize, to use the word of Dr. Khan, our approach to longevity medicine. So, I mean, do we agree on this? How do we go and proceed to enable this? The issue of scalability and applying longevity medicine to populations as opposed to individuals.
Because everybody's looking. Everybody's looking at me, I better take this one. I'm going to use a general analogy when we think about scaling technology in the marketplace. Because ultimately, democratization happens because the market embraces the technology and it scales. And this is the partnership in society between the public sector and then ultimately the private sector. There's no drug that governments make and sell. There's no IT systems that governments make and sell ultimately. So what does it take? And one typically thinks of three things that you need to understand. You need, first and foremost, a differentiated technology. If it's not differentiated, then it does not solve any new problem or doesn't make a current problem solvable easier or better. And so this is where the people who understand the technology have been brought to the table. And with all due respect, most of the people in this room are experts at a specific type of technology. Sometimes we believe because we're experts on the technology, we now know how to democratize it. Nothing could be further from the truth. The next thing, if you imagine this as a triangle, for those of you who are former students of mine, I only know about triangles. So the second pole of this triangle is understanding the domain within which that technology will be deployed. Every technology, whether it is a drug, will get deployed within a domain. If you understand the domain, you will actually be able to understand how to adjust that technology so it's applicable. If your technology is ahead of the domain, it actually will not get scaled. So the domain actually has to evolve at a rate that is consistent with how advanced the technology is. Those of you old enough to remember the Apple Newton was a brilliant personal assistant. However, there were no apps for it. Next time round, it succeeded because Apple created the whole app marketplace. Okay? And so that is domain. In this case, it's healthcare systems. We're going to have to understand that. The third is your business model. You can have great technology, you can understand the domain, but you actually don't have an operating business model. How is this going to scale and still make money? If it doesn't do that, then there's no investors, government or private. And really it's those three things. And you can look at example after example, you've got to get those three things right. The second facet to this is risk-reward control. How much risk are you taking? What is the reward for that, taking that risk, and who's controlling that risk? So I won't get into a whole business school discussion. If you really want to democratize, those are two triangles you have to understand the balance between. Hope that gives you the start of the discussion.
I guess one other thing that you and I have talked about quite a bit is how do you get these things around the world? Because arguably, geroscience interventions might have a bigger benefit in places like sub-Saharan Africa and the developing world than in the developed world. I think in 3 years from now, if I'm not mistaken, in sub-Saharan Africa, there will be many more elderly than children. Birth rates are going way down. People have to be healthy there in older age to continue physical labor. It isn't just intellectual labor. We need to think about agriculture, as I briefly mentioned, in countries like in sub-Saharan Africa. If you could delay lactopause, for example, in cows, or ovipause in chickens, and have more production of agricultural, better wool production, that would do a lot for the developing world too. So I think when we're talking about democratization, in addition to sort of marketplace stuff, and you know more about this than anyone, and Andrew Scott, for example, has written extensively on this, how do you get these things to parts of the world that will benefit even more than the first world?
So I think what Jim's raising is emphasizing what I just said. Each of those that you've just described are unique marketplaces. And for each of them, you have to understand the application of that domain, and the business model of how to get an ROI is going to be different in the animal husbandry market versus in a sub-Saharan Africa market versus Europe versus North. Very unique health systems. And so it still applies. And I think one of the things I'd advise the young entrepreneurs is this is the difference between seasoned business leaders and just coming up with an idea and saying, I'm going to launch a company. There is a reason, if you look at the literature, older entrepreneurs are more successful than younger entrepreneurs. And the literature is consistently shown. And it's not the technology, it's the domain knowledge.
And I think the other thing is we have to recognize these interventions will affect, as I mentioned, not just the elderly, but children and everybody across the lifespan. So there are going to be multiple applications that we're only just beginning, and there'll be military applications and all kinds of things that we haven't dreamt about.
May I add one thing? I think the basis is also learning from not only cultures, but also ethnicity. So you already said the environment is very important. So we need trials, we need observational studies in very different ecosystems. Not only what can somebody afford, but what are habits, for example, because we know lifestyle is so important. And I think we should not forget that. So we should not just focus on supplements and repurposed drugs and new drugs, etc., because we have the intervention already in hands. We just have to optimize it and individualize it in different ecosystems and environments.
Would like to? No, I think we can put the questions from the audience at the end. We still have like 5 minutes for our questions, and then
So we talked about biomarkers. I think one of the questions is, what do we measure, when do we measure it, and where? And we also talked about different stages, right? That aging, Andrea, you mentioned, starts in middle age or even earlier. And so, we talked a lot about intervention, but there's also the idea of being able to measure the biology of aging in humans. So how do we approach this? Because there are so many dimensions, so many stages of life, even in older age. People who are 90, 95 are not, don't have the same biology as those who are 80 or 70. So how do we approach this? I mean, because, that also speaks to the issue of scalability, since we need to develop products that are applicable to large populations. So how do we address this? Where do we start? What should we prioritize in terms of measuring? Anybody wants to?
Shall I take that? Or do you want first?
Yeah.
Yes. So this is a critical point because it will be very obvious, and I think it's already obvious, that at different stages of life in the trajectory, different interventions will work. And maybe also different biomarkers because they are not yet sensitive. So because biology is changing over the life course. So I don't think that we will in the end apply in an 80-year-old, even biologically much, much, much younger, and in a 40-year-old the same therapies, because different mechanisms might be affected. So I think we really need, and this is just my gut feeling, a decade approach where we say, okay, 40, 50-year-olds, 50, 60-year-olds, where damage already occurred, we are testing biomarkers, we are testing different interventions. And the entire field is, I think, now heading off the one-size-fits-all is not going to work. Not everybody will be lucky with metformin or with an NMN, etc. But we really need more research, I would say, in what's going, not wrong, but what is changing during the life course in the hallmarks of aging, or certain cellular phenotypes we can now measure. And that's what we should do on bigger scale. So that's what we are trying to do at NUS, that we really have a core. We are measuring as much as we can to understand, and then based on that individual biological phenotype, together with digital phenotyping, together with clinical phenotyping, a certain therapy, and learning from that and as one approach.
I also think that one important thing that we have not discussed is the importance of doing longitudinal studies. In other words, measuring, I've always said, knowing what my level of IL-6 or GF15 today doesn't mean a thing. What I need to know is two things. One, what's the trajectory over a lifetime of my ability to produce those molecules? And what is, second, is the same. The ability to produce them, in other words, coming back to the concept I mentioned about resilience, what's important is not the level, it's how much can I produce if I need to produce it. If that decreases, that's an important biomarker. And the other thing that I think is important is that, as Andrea was saying, not everybody ages on the same trajectory, and some of them will have more problems with one hallmark or whatever mechanism, others with other. The treatment has to be addressed to that. So basically, what I envision is we need a generalized method for measuring how you're aging, but then if your aging is not optimal, then we have to go to a second level that's much deeper and goes into what mechanisms are the ones that are failing, so that we can identify a treatment that's appropriate for that failure and not for just your aging faster.
Yeah, I'm interested in a level beyond that too. You know, as I mentioned in my slide, I'm more interested in gerodiagnostics, and that's, are they things that you can target an intervention for that you find where the intervention, where if you target that particular thing and it changes, does it predict change in phenotype? And will it move with improvement and with the intervention? So there are things that are predictive. Those might be useful in some ways. GDF15 you mentioned, as I mentioned before. That may be very useful predictively, but it doesn't make sense when it comes to interventions, because GDF15 goes up if you fast, it goes up if you take metformin, and it goes up if you exercise. You know, so if it goes up with, and it predicts frailty and so forth, so it's useful as a predictor. It's not going to be useful to gauge what's happening to people once you start applying interventions. And you mentioned things like certain lipoproteins. Same kind of thing. They look good to begin with, and then you start trying to intervene against them, and you cause more harm than good. So we have to be very careful about them.
Right, we can now move to the questions from the audience.
Sorry, I have one comment for you, Dr. Bischof, and then I'll go to the question, sorry. Okay. Regarding the longevity course that she mentioned, it's actually very amazing, very good. I enhance you, all of you, I mean, to enroll in this course. It's very amazing. The only dark side about this course is the certificate. It's really very low quality certificate. I'm sorry, I have to ask you again to reissue the certificate. I could not dare to hang it on my clinic because it's very low quality certificate.
We will improve. It's a volunteer effort.
Yes, really.
Whoever
I'll
wants
show it to
help.
You. If you don't believe me, I'll show it to you. How? Because when it's converted to PDF, it will be something very funny. I know.
We will improve.
Okay. My first question to Dr. Kirkland, regarding you mentioned the effects of senolytics on longevity. I was asking whether you could not, mix the effects of all these, like flavonoids with the fasting, because I apply this in my, whether it has a synergistic effect. For example, I apply these, let's say, procedures in my, from clinical practice. In my clinic, for example, when I fast for 48 hours and then I'll take high dose of, for example, antioxidants and then hormesis, cold ice, and then hot water, and all these, and high intensity internal training, all these all together, whether, we don't have a synergistic, better effect on your results. My last question to Dr. Manik, she did not specify exactly the mTORC1 from mTORC2 or the dark side of mTORC2 about the disturbance of sugar.
We will have Dr. Manik on the second panel. So
Okay, then
yes, don't worry about
thanks.
that. Yeah, we
Thank you very
can
much.
address the first one.
I'm not sure I'd be prescribing these agents to people yet until carefully controlled clinical trials are done, let alone combinations of interventions. At some point, when we've got data, preclinical and clinical data that are sufficient, that might be the place and time to look at combinations of interventions. I do worry about combinations of geroscience interventions because some of them will cancel each other out. For example, metformin or rapamycin prevents senolytics from working because they inhibit the SASP. And senolytics work by turning the SASP back onto senescent cells and allowing them to commit suicide. So you have to stop metformin or rapamycin for a period of time in experimental animal systems before you use senolytics. So these things may be much less than synergistic, and I think it's dangerous to be at this point talking about combinations of anything when we don't even know the effectiveness of anything in carefully controlled clinical trials.
Fasting, yeah. I want to just add something quickly also is that, the various interventions that we have, I think there is existing evidence and there is emerging evidence that they rely on very different mechanisms, sometimes that are overlapping. So if you want to combine those, you really don't know what's going to happen. At least from the preclinical studies, that's what we see. If you do, some rejuvenation with heterochronic parabiosis, for instance, or if you run a mouse, on exercise, the biology, what happens in the tissue is going to be very different. So how do you predict, this from a combination is I think, a hard question. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Excellent session about how to democratize longevity medicine, so congratulations. I am Jose Cordeiro, and I am a counselor to the Association of Medical Doctors in Madrid, Spain. And so my first comment to Andrea is that Spain has had a longevity medicine society for 30 years. And we have over 200 medical doctors who are members of that society. So they should become a good member with the International Longevity Medicine Society. But my question is about clinics, because I know Peter Diamandis since he founded Human Longevity Incorporated. And they wanted to go to the high net worth individuals market, to the highest market. And then he left that, and then he founded Fountain Life Clinics. And now there is another group which is called the Healthy Longevity Clinics. And probably there are several groups of longevity clinics. So how do you see the market evolving and for different price targets? Please.
We can maybe give the room to Dr. Wei Wuhu about that, and then to Andrea.
Yes, Peter is a good friend and our founder. And, I always say, the more competitors, the better, because it takes, competition to create a market. And, the reality is actually, I don't even think there's any competition at all because, most of our clients are actually pretty local. So for instance, if we have a clinic in Silicon Valley, the Silicon Valley client is very unlikely willing to fly to Florida to go to Peter's clinic in Florida because it's just, too much trouble. So we actually believe the clinic we are building in the future will be like Starbucks coffees. It will be 50,000 of them in your neighborhood because it is a data collection center. And we actually truly believe in the future, the process of the data is going to be run by algorithms instead of by, by human beings. A lot of the imaging, everything in the future is going to be AI machine learning. And since we are focused on prevention instead of, treating urgent diseases, we believe that, most of these clinics has time to deal with a risk factors. So instead of, treating a late-stage colon cancer, which you have time urgency, versus if somebody has a Lynch syndrome, and that, when somebody is 10 years old, 15 years old, you actually have time to manage the Lynch syndrome. So we believe the cost eventually will be much lower when a lot of these data is going to be managed by automation, basically. I don't know if I answer your question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are moving to the next question, unless there is a comment, something emerging. So, sorry.
Just a very short comment. My biggest problem is that the longevity industry, if we are treating individuals, it's a non-regulated industry. I don't like, per se, regulation, absolutely not, but I love quality. And because of a lack of knowledge in the layman space, even on the healthcare professionals, I think we need a little bit of regulation. I don't say that the FDA or the EMA has to regulate everything, but at least we have to regulate ourselves. And there is a mass market at the moment, and everywhere there are wellness clinics, longevity clinics springing up, and I also do it. I think we have to come together to say, okay, what's in the field, what's not in the field. And I fully agree with Mr. Kirkland, we need more data, because I as a physician sometimes think I cannot treat you, I will not prescribe it because I don't know if it's safe. And I think what we have to sell as a community is safety and evidence. What's the return of investment?
The other thing is, I don't know if you find it, patients appreciate when you tell them we don't know yet.
Yeah.
And it may be 2 or 3 years before we do know, and you make sure that they know that you'll tell them if the evidence comes across. So I think people are perfectly, in fact, they're more than happy to hear that.
And that's very important.
James Maier from Cambrian here. So a theme from today has been getting more people in the room outside of the geroscience and longevity medicine ecosystem. And so this panel has got like an interesting diversity of experiences, right? From clinicians to business leaders to people doing clinical trials. I'm curious if there is alignment among our panelists here around what the watershed moment, like the nearest to the present watershed moment in geroscience or longevity medicine is that could create that momentum or bring all of those people in. I know there are some of us, like Nir and myself and others, who talk about specific clinical trials that could be run, but is it instead specific biomarkers that need to be validated in a trial? Like, if we can, as a field, and this is why I'm addressing a kind of question to the whole panel here, what do you believe is that watershed moment, that lever that will bring people from many different disciplines running to ours?
I think it's already happening. I think things like evolution are an example of this, and governments are getting very interested. I have to meet with a lot of, at 9 o'clock tomorrow night, because Washington time, with people very high up in all 3 branches of the government in the US. You saw it in London with, the chief scientific advisor to the prime minister at the time, who's undergone what they call clown fall now, but, certainly there are other governments, like the Singapore government, I think, is going to be present. So I think some of these things are already happening just because of the momentum of the field. So I think an important, in addition to the general public, who we really don't know the sentiment of, and we need some Gallup kinds of polls to figure out all of this. Another audience is, as Mehmood said, senior people in various governments at the very top who can actually drive things. People who are mid-level bureaucrats are very important, as Mehmood said, but the people who really drive things are the people at the very top, and they're beginning to arguably pay attention now even. So we might be close to that watershed even before clinical trials start coming out. But we also have to be mindful, a lot of these clinical trials will fail. And we have to prepare everyone for that and say that, the first 5, 10, 20 clinical trials may fail, but don't let that give everybody wet feet. You know, that's the nature of clinical science.
Just to build on that, if you understand the basics of strategy, it's the prioritization and allocation of resources. It's really that simple. And when leaders, business or government, start to reallocate resources to this field, you'll have reached that watershed moment. The question really is, what will it take? When budgets move between ministries, when budgets move within an agency like NIH from one area to another, because usually it's very difficult to just grow the budget overall. It's really reallocation. Governments don't suddenly have money. It's what they see as priorities. And I think a key part of the activity of all of us is how to make this a priority. And once that happens, it becomes a domino effect, because the resources themselves bring other results, and it becomes self-catalyzing. So that's one thing. The second, to make the argument to decision makers that by doing X, Y, and Z, you're going to save money, almost never works with decision makers. I've been at head of state level discussions. They don't want to hear it. They won't say that publicly. They don't want to hear it. What they want to hear is, where should I take resources away from and where should I put it? And so it behooves us to have that discussion to do that. Now, for that, we need the right data and we need the early adopters. Okay? And those early adopters have got to come with a unified single message. I'm not suggesting everybody gets to a consensus, but there's some things that we have to agree on, whatever those are. I think once this field, and if you look at other fields that have had that juncture, again, I hate dating myself, there was a time in endocrinology when a very respectable endocrinologist used to worry that glucose control was harmful. Remember pre-DCCT? There was a risk that hypoglycemia events would be worse than the complications, and there was also, coming actually from Scandinavia data, that tight control accelerated retinopathy. What was the watershed moment? We finally got the data, and suddenly, and I use this as an example, glucose strips started to become standard of care, insurances started to provide it, government started to provide it, oral hypoglycemics and insulin started to, and now we're at the point where even the cost of insulin is being challenged. All of that goes back to a consensus that tight glucose control changes the outcome. So I would ask, in that analogy, what is it going to take for us?
And part of all of this is asking governments to find out where they're spending money and how much are they spending money on geroscience and care for the elderly. They don't even have a good cataloging of this. So there's report language in the 23 US budget that was just put in by both the Senate and the House. That report language asks the NIH, for example, to look at where across the 27 ICs they're spending money on geroscience research. The NIA knows where it's spending money, but the Cancer Institute doesn't. How much money is being spent in the VA system that could be moved around or used for... So I think you have to know, in order to know, to go to these people and say how to reallocate, they have to know where the money's actually being spent at the moment, and that's no trivial task. So for that reason, the way some of us have elected to approach this is to have report language put in, not asking people to spend things for having no budget, because people in the government hate having report language where they've got to do something without having a budget attached to it. But we do want to know, and they want to know, where is the money actually being spent at the moment so decisions can be made later on.
Thank you so much for the comments. I would like to maybe also bring, just for concluding perspective, also the Chinese one, right? If it allows. Also there, the tremendous efforts of the governments are being supported by other players that I think very important. We didn't have the time to talk about them a lot. The insurance companies and organizations that are in general supporting health. So, the equivalence to the UN, in the Chinese side. So there was a program already, in China we have a 5 years programs. So 2020 was a 5 years program developed with the main focus, there's always the main focuses that are being funded very, abundantly, was the healthy aging. There's no word longevity there in China, but healthy life, they call it, right? Wei will correct me if I'm wrong. So I see the effort every day. And the beautiful thing, ask where is the momentum? I think it's right there exactly, beyond the education of physicians are joining, beyond the society creations, beyond philanthropists and other funding bodies being created. I see more and more public health support, and I see more and more credible and actually nice and friendly support from insurance companies, which, as you know, are not exactly best friends of physicians in general. So, sorry. So I think we're really living the momentum, and I think just learning how to communicate better, and always finding the best that we can get out of those collaborations. As Professor Barzilai said, we should all be friends not only among ourselves in this longevity field, but really with the players outside, and learn how to do it in the best way will help us to accelerate. All right, Morten is showing me the sign, which thank you so much to all of the panelists to be here. Thank you, Wei Wu, for connecting from China. Thank you for all the questions. We will now rewind. I will invite the speakers of the next panel to come to the stage. So please remain seated. And we will continue with our second panel talking about the